Eileen Ullman. The Fish of Turkey's Past, a recent history of disappeared species and commercial fishery extinction from the Black and Marmara Seas. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I was doing my master's on the Turkish fisheries and reconstructing them and doing shifting baselines on them. And I read something in a couple journals that quite alarmed me, that in the Black Sea there used to be 40 commercial species, and that had decreased to about 5 commercial species. But nowhere could I find the change, because no one had documented what species were lost and when. So this is a first attempt to provide a baseline of what had disappeared. So I had a Black Sea expert and a Marmara Sea expert helping me with this. So the fisheries data in Turkey, although they started being reported in 1950, only started being spatially reported in 1967 for 5 different seas in Turkey. So there was the Western, the Eastern Black Sea, Marmara Sea, the Aegean Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. So what we did was we compared the statistics from 1967 to 2016, so a 50-year timeline, and noted what species disappeared and when to produce timelines, and then the species that had been reduced by 75 to 99%, we put in a table as they were facing commercial extinctions for conservation purposes. And then since sharks were only assessed under 3 categories, under 3 taxa in the statistics, there's angel sharks, there is rays, and sharks in general. So to assess these, I did an in-depth search of historical data, fishermen surveys, trying to and what is no longer there. So we chose the Black Sea and Sea of Marmara because these felt the changes first, and these are both nearly totally enclosed basins. The Marmara Sea only fished by Turkey, but it's a very important ecological gateway for many migrating species in between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara. And the catches of the Sea of Marmara include the Bosphorus Strait and the Dardanelles, which are very important corridors. So just a brief history of the advancements of the Turkish fisheries. These were one of the most abundant fisheries, I think, in the world. In the early 1900s, there are many old records where you could actually fish by basket in parts of the Bosphorus. I don't know many other places in the world where the fish used to be that abundant. The older fishermen I talked to, they could pretty much catch whatever they could carry up until the 1960s. In the 1950s, the Black Sea fisheries became overfished of the top predators, and this was mostly by the other Black Sea nations because the Turkish fisheries hadn't advanced yet. The 1950s saw the introduction of sonar, which catches increased about 3-fold initially. The 1970s saw heavy investment from the state to develop the Turkish fisheries. So many fishers got credit and subsidies, and that's when they were able to build the purse seine and the trawling fleet. So the late 1970s, early 80s was the beginning of the trawlers. Here I have the shark catches for the Black Sea and Sea of Marmara. You can see that huge spike in like 1979 in the Black Sea and the subsequential decline. The same thing for the Sea of Marmara, but that happened a couple years after. So everything happens first in the Black Sea and then gets kind of amplified in the Sea of Marmara, which is much smaller. So yeah, 28 out of 36 shark species reported in Turkey are on the IUCN Red List. Some are still data deficient. So what have we lost? This is the timeline of marine extirpations from the Black Sea. So yeah, quite a lot has been lost, as you can see. We have angel sharks and dogfish. I just wanted to point those out separately. This is the marine extirpations from the Sea of Marmara, so a little bit less. But then if we look at the commercial extinctions, we have 19 commercial extinctions for the Black Sea, 32 for the Sea of Marmara, so many species are in jeopardy of not existing anymore as commercial fisheries. And then here I have the dogfish, angel shark, and the thornback ray, which were reported separately. Okay, and then my in-depth analysis on what sharks, what anecdotal evidence, historical evidence I could find about the sharks. One very, the bramble shark, there was recently a Mediterranean paper that said this species is extinct from the Eastern Mediterranean, but there have been 5 records from Marmara Sea in the 2000s, so this is a very important finding, warranting conservation. Requiem sharks, not sighted in Marmara since the 1950s. One very sad thing that happened in Turkey was in 1986, there was a migrating bluefin tuna, and there was one Japanese entrepreneur that came to Marmara and offered the fishermen a very high price for bluefin tuna. And in 2 days, they caught about the entire spawning stock of bluefin tuna. And they never came to Marmara Sea again, but many other species used to associate with bluefin tuna, such as the great white porbeagle shark. So all these migrations kind of stopped with the bluefin tuna, which there have been a couple recently sighted in the Black Sea, but they are definitely not spawning there again. Sandbar sharks used to be present in all seas except for the Black Sea, but now there are only 2 populations. One my colleague talked about yesterday. Yeah, blue sharks. But blunt-nosed gill sharks, we have quite a few records lately, so that's quite exciting. It's not all doom and gloom. Okay, here's a story of my father, who I think has the last hammerhead sighting in Turkey. So my dad was a Turkish Navy diver. In 1960, there was an Italian tanker that was stationed in Iskenderun Bay that was supposed to deliver oil to somewhere in Africa. But the Suez Canal had a crisis at the time and was closed. So it was selling its gas in Iskenderun, and then there was a fatal accident, and unfortunately the ship blew up. And then my dad, as a Navy diver, was stationed to go see if the boat could be recovered. So him and his friend in 1961 went down and assessed the boat. Unfortunately, my dad didn't take a photo at the time, even though he had a camera that day. But as they were coming up, there was a hammerhead shark that was circling him and his friend that was about 9 feet, that followed them all the way to the surface. And my dad was so scared that he did not go in the water again for 2 days. So I'm writing this account up as possibly the last hammerhead sighting in Turkey, and if anyone wants to join me for a Mediterranean hammerhead assessment, please contact me later. Okay, so one of my new jobs is at Akdeniz Koruma Derneği in Turkey, and they do lots of really great conservation work and have many different projects. So Boncuk Bay is the famous nursery ground for sandbar in the 1990s. In 2019, they received full protection from scuba diving and now is self-patrolled, so they're kind of taking conservation out of hands of the government and doing it themselves. Hopefully later this year, they're gonna be able to find fishers themselves without Coast Guard help. I just wanted to, I want to play a video clip, but I don't know how. Thank you, Emilio, our savior. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so here's a little video clip of the sandbar that was taken a couple months ago. Okay, yeah. So the Turkish marine fisheries are rapidly declining. It seems that the government has put all their efforts into farmed fish lately, so that's kind of sad. All the elasmobranchs mentioned here warrant immediate protection and conservation, and thank you.
So thank you very much, Eileen. Any question? If not, I do have a question. Do you think you can recover some other type of information, like unconventional data on the presence of the different species in your areas, like some photos or whatever? It is possible, do you think?
Yes, I think the more I interview fishermen, the older fishermen have a wealth of data. I think that's where we're going to get the best stuff. There's one book that was recently published a couple years ago that has lots of beautiful information on the shark fishery and how it developed and how they pretty much scraped everything up in the first few years. So there's, yeah, lots of data.
Some other information you can maybe gather.
Definitely, yeah, I plan to.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any question? Okay, thank you very much.
The next talk, Jaime Penades Suai, bycatch of batoids in trammel nets in the Valencian region, Spanish Mediterranean, a case of unreported and unregulated fishing.
Well, good morning, everyone. As they say, I'm Jaime Penades. I come from the Lamna Association in Valencia. The spark for with the ongoing relationship with fishermen, with local fishermen, and also, well, the horrible fact of seeing day. Especially, I can remember one day. Sorry. These are 103 skates and rays fished only by one net. There are, it's a net from 4,000 meters. You could see here some Daciatis pastinaca, which is a vulnerable species, and Miliobatis aquila, which is also vulnerable, and then some Torpedo marmorata and Torpedo. They also found some critically species, Gymnura tabella, 2 individuals, and then Atomielaeus bovinus. As you could see, this is a little bit horrifying for only one day, one net. Let it sink in, because we're going to talk about this problem a lot. When studying Mediterranean batoids, we have to keep in mind that the Mediterranean Sea is very peculiar. It's a closed sea with high diversity, high number of endemic species, mostly on the western part. As you can see, there is a higher risk of extinction for batoids in the area, where the global statuses for the UCN are data deficient or better statuses. In the Mediterranean, they are worst. This is mostly because the biggest threat for this species in the area is the commercial fishing, as bycatch or as direct catches. And as you could see, one of the main problems of these fisheries is the lack of taxonomic resolution in the case of batoids. Going particularly in the area of study, the coast of Valencia is more or less 400 kilometers, and we have distributed along this coast 22 fishing ports. I'll be focusing on the 321 artisanal boats. The objectives of these investigations were, first, to estimate the total bycatch of batoids, 2, to get to know the problem, the batoid diversity, size, and the reproductive stages, and 3, to have something to give to the management plans, spatial and seasonal distribution of the bycatch species. For this, we used this material and methods. As I said before, we are working with artisanal boats. They are small length. They change seasonally from fishing gears. Of those gears, we were focusing on trammel nets. There are a set of 3 panels of nets that are knit together. The 2 external panels have bigger holes. The internal panel has smaller holes. and then it facilitates the entanglement of marine life on the net. To accomplish the first objective, we conducted some interviews with the fishermen the year before, and then compared this data with onboard observations. To accomplish the second and third objectives, we look at all the batoid individuals that appear fished on the nets, taking all measures, sexing them, and then weighting them. As for the results, we have some interesting results. First of all, we took samples from 4 ports, one in the north, one in the middle of the coast, and one in the south. We were on board on 12 boats for a total of 63 hulls, 42 in winter, 21 in spring. One of the first results is that the smaller nets, targeting Mulus surmuletus and Aristeus antenatus, show no batoids bycatch. So we will be focusing on this talk only on the nets that catch batoids, which are the biggest nets, 20 centimeters whole diameter. These are fishes that are looking for Dentex dentex, Solea solea, or Sepia officinalis. When looking at the numbers, we did the interviews and got some estimations of the total bycatch of the captures per unit of effort, and then did the onboard investigations and made the same estimations. And as you could see, there's a factor of difference of 2.5 between the interviews and the onboard assessments. And also you can see as a result that the Port of Valencia has the higher difference between effort and bycatch. With less fishing effort, they are getting more bycatch. When looking at all the species that we have found, you can see the high diversity of species. There are 5 families represented here with all these species, and mostly I'm going to be talking about the most numerous ones: Torpedo marmorata, Torpedo torpedo, Racha radula, and Asiatis pastinaca. One thing to highlight is the lack of bycatch in the port of the Castellon region, Vinaroz, where we could only find the Asiatis pastinaca. As you can see, there are some critically endangered rays in these captures, and also I would like you to focus on Raja radula. We got 67 individuals in 63 hulls, and this is an endangered species. As for the discussion, we found some seasonal variations. For example, in Torpedo marmorata, as you could see, between winter and spring, the number of males and females differed, and also the number of immature and mature. So we are guessing that during spring, these species are breeding or spawning, because mostly females were found in the nets. For Raja radula, you can see also that we got a similar number of individuals between winter and spring. And you can see that the scenarios change. In winter, we found mostly males, and in spring, mostly females. And the number of mature and immature changed. So we are looking maybe at a spawning, hatching scenario, and then in spring, mating or breeding scenario. In the case of torpedo, we only found bycatches during winter, no torpedo during spring, and 99% of the catches were mature, and half were female, half were male. We're seeing like a mating scenario. As I showed you the list of batoids that we found, when looking at other studies in the Western Mediterranean, we found 3 studies: Morey from 2006, Saidi 2016, and Tiralongo 2018. One thing to notice, from the Balearic Islands, they found the same species that we found, but also 2 species that we didn't encounter, Raja montagi and Rosto Raja alba. In the case of Saidi, they only found torpedo, the Asiatis pastinaca, and a species that we didn't found, the Asiatis marmorata. And in the case of Tiralongo, really close from here in Italy, he only found 4 species in trammel nets: Torpedo marmorata, torpedo, the Asiatis pastinaca, and Racha radula. As you can see, we got a higher diversity than the studies that are more eastern or more in the central Mediterranean, and got more or less the same diversity as the Balearic Islands. This is the slide I prepared it with more care. I would like you to focus on this slide because I think this is the real problem underneath our results, the problem that we must discuss more. There are 8 species of the genus Raja in the Valencia region. The fishermen don't differentiate between them. The net catches all. And between all these species, there is Raja radula, which is an endangered species. And as I showed you before, this is the species that they are catching in higher numbers. And when you go to the market, all the species are skinned. You can only see the meat, and they are labeled as a Raja. So we are covering the slaughter of an endangered species, and we should ask the politicians, the stakeholders, the management planners to change this situation with a greater identification of the species. So just quick conclusions. Nets, smaller nets do not catch batoids in the area. The observed bycatch is higher than the expected by interviews, so we need the government to do onboard investigations. The management plans should take in care all the variations between ports, and also ensure that fishermen have the education or the resources to identify the rays. And as you could see, this was only a preliminary study. We need to do more detailed studies, and I would love to see next year more talks about bycatches along the Mediterranean. I think they are mostly needed. So thank you very much to all of you for attending this talk. Thank for all the fishermen involved who were of great help, the regional government, and also the US Fish, Wildlife and Service who paid for the surveys. Thank you all for your attention. If you have any question, I'll be glad to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaime. Any
Also,
question? Oh, sorry.
If anybody is looking for this species or needs samples, we try to get them back into the water if they are alive, but we also got a lot of samples from dead animals, so you could see here all the individuals if you need it for your studies. So.
Okay. Thank you, Jaime. Any questions?
Hola. Hi.
Hi.
Maybe I missed it, but so did you do this through the year or across years, or was that a one-off thing?
This was 1 year. During winter, we did 42
winter,
on board, and then during spring, we did 21 observations on board.
And you're planning on, yeah?
We went on board with the fishermen, a day of work, and look at all the catches in the net.
You're planning to continue the surveys? Is it a relationship with the fisher where you can continue? Or is it
There is right now a PhD student who is going to start his studies for 4 years, David. He's right there. And I hope he gets the investigation and he puts it to a bigger level. But he's going to work in trolling, which is a different kind of gear. So I hope we can still manage. Most of the onboard investigations, I did it on 3 days. So I hope to continue doing this work. This is not my thesis, this is something else.
It's great because I think it's one of the very few studies that we've seen in this conference of batoids.
Yes.
So, cool.
Thank you.
Hi, great to work.
Hi.
Just a comment on the taxonomy of batoids. You have in some season, for some species, large part of immature individuals. And several of these species got the, I would say, discrimination characters, distinctive characters, only after a size of subadult or adult
Yes.
size. So this is very important to be careful, and also I would like to confirm that in the Balearic Island there is no Raya montagui, because Raya montagui is only on the North African
Yes.
coast, because in the north there is no, in the North Mediterranean there is no this species, only Raya polystigma that you find. But this is quite tricky for assessing the species, and also Austroraya alba probably In 20 years, we didn't find any individuals of Rostoria alba, only in the south, not in the north.
Yes.
It's quite strange that they move upward.
For the case of Raja Montana, work with by Morey, so we should ask him. I also got the same question. But regarding the juvenile stages, in the case of Torpedo Marmorata, in the case of Torpedo is easy. In the case of Raja Radula is more complicated, and we didn't. We got some individuals we couldn't assess the species, so we kept them as Raja. But in other cases that we could, there were bigger animals that the claspers were not calcified or they were not the size for being a mature female, so we put them in this category. But as you said, we could use some DNA sampling in the future. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Jaime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next talk will be by Filippo Bargnesi, a world platform to support data collection on endangered shark species in the Mediterranean Sea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In my presentation, I'm going to talk, of course, on shark and conservation. I think that there's no need to go deep in this room, because everybody of us know that the shark, that maybe our planet is not a good place for shark to live. There are a lot of endangered species and a lot of problem in having data on these species. And basically, probably the Mediterranean Sea is the worst place for a shark to live in the world, because 60% of the species are threatened. I'm talking about the species assessed by the UCN, and there is also a 20% of data deficient species in the area, so there are quite a lot of conservation problem in the Mediterranean Sea. And basically it is because, as we know, most of the time conservation problem are just caused by the human presence, and the human presence in the Mediterranean Sea started very early, as we all know, and that's basically why we have this many conservation problems. If you want to go deep in this kind of things, there are a lot of paper also trying to reconstruct the baseline, because we don't know also the baseline of the Mediterranean Sea. We don't know how many sharks could live in the Mediterranean Sea, because we just started to study an impacted sea when we started. And basically we need data. We need data for assess the status of the species, and especially from this area. And I'm talking to you about this project that was born in the US at the Stanford University by an idea of Francesco Ferretti in 2013. And the project is called Shark Pulse. Now is moving with Francesco at Virginia Tech. And our aim is just to create the world's biggest collection of image-based sightings of shark. And of course, making our sightings, our data collection available to scientists and conservation managers and so on. But why image-based sightings? This is Rome, and this is St. Peter's Square in the Pope election in 2005. And this is the same square in the Pope election, of 2013. Something has changed. The world is changing. Yesterday, on the bus coming back from the gala dinner, there was people around me talking about sharing, following, and images on Instagram. This is our world. We live in an image-based world. That's it. But this could be also an opportunity for us. Why? Because from this picture we could have some information. And what information do we need to have a shark pulse? Of course, the picture, the date, the location, the species, or at least the guest species, and the source. We also need some kind of source or validation. Well, how shark pulse work? It is a quite complex things of platform. We have a mobile app. Actually, we developed the mobile app 6-7 years ago, And we are very happy to see that a lot of initiatives are developing mobile app to collect data on shark, and that's good because it means that it was a good idea. So good for us and good for Francesco that has this idea. But basically we found that maybe to have big data, because we need big data for shark, mobile apps are not the best way. It's a good way, but not the best. The best way to have big data is work on basically computer programming and web scraping. These social networks and initiatives on the web allow you to access the API, and so through their API you can basically go and see where in this platform there are sharks, and you can check if there are nice information to collect and things like this. It's a lot of work, but it works. Well, just a brief overview. This is our platform, and this is what you can find on internet. This is all of our global sightings. They are clustered, but if you go in, the cluster just broke up in all the sightings. Okay, it is just a way to present the data online. We have more than 12,000 records of a lot of species, and our data are free and available because we think that for big data, it is the only way to be effective, especially later in the analysis. And this is our collection of data in the Mediterranean Sea. I have to mention also Agostino Leone and Stefano Moro. They'll help a lot in collecting this data and built this map. And I'm shark now. We also collect data on race, but I'm presenting data on Mediterranean shark. We have more than 500 picture, image-based record of shark of 35 species that represent 80% of the species. And what we can see that we have a lot of record of threatened species and data deficient. More than 70% of our record are from species threatened or data deficient. And that's good because IUCN always asks for this kind of data. And we have, and they can take it for us. No problem, we can share it. And but what we can do with those data? Basically, we are now trying to explore the first exploration. But for example, you can have information about possible strongholds because you have the location in which the species were recently observed. Of course, it exists only in some areas. For example, we know that these species also exist in the eastern basin. But we recently observed these species several times around Corsica, for example. And that's good because it is a kind of real-time process. For example, if you go in the IUCN and you look at the report and assessment for the short fin mako, the last sightings is 2005. Of course, it's not, I don't want to add to say nothing to IUCN because I know that they do the assessment once in a while. It's not a problem. The thing is that can we provide really updated data to feed this kind of initiative and others. And every scientist then need this kind of data. And also we are trying to look something more deep and more interesting. For example, we found that in our record sometimes, and for some species, especially for some pelagic species, there are shifts from spring, summer. For example, the blue shark is we found mostly in spring, summer in the northern part of the Mediterranean, and then our record in the fall, winter seems to be mostly found in the southern, central Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea. And this kind of things was observed also in the common treasure, same things. And these are interesting things that give us information that needed to be more explored. So it is also good for scientists for setting a plan of research and to plan our research. And of course, from pictures, sometimes you can have an idea of the size of the animals. We found a lot of immature I'm talking again about pelagic species because now there are the species in which we are more interested in to explore the data. And for example, for the short fin mako, 75% of the species from which the size was detectable was immature. There was a very high percentage of immature short fin mako in our record. And then, of course, for example, in the blue shark, it's possible to collect data on pups and on pupping because we found 2 parturition, basically out of the door here in the Ionian Sea, and location in which pups are more present than others, and that's good information to go deeper and explore more what is happening, what is going on in our sea. So, and of course you can try to have information also on the seasonality of in which these things happen. Then, what we think is that opportunistic data can provide really useful information and they can be useful for conservationists, for scientists, for making assessment, and because it is a real-time process and can really help to fill the gap in the Mediterranean, especially in the Mediterranean, because of the things that we know. But the most important thing is that we need open data and collaboration because for be effective in the analysis of this data, we have to think on a regional level. And the only way to think on big data and really effective analysis is open access. And actually, iNaturalist teach a lot on us in this because it's probably the best naturalistic platform in the world, and it is because it is an open access platform. If you have any question, you can ask us. Of course, this is our website, and thank you very much.
Any question?
Right, yeah, hi. Thank you for the talk, first of all. And I have a question to the seasonal. So could it be that there are more sightings in more the south because of maybe tourists or people going in winter and fall months more to the south and then therefore recording more there and less in the northern areas where they were first? So could it be a reason for the seasonal shifts?
Okay, this is of course an interesting because we work on opportunistic data, so we don't have a real observation effort. We are trying to develop some models and systems that can, in some way, try to consider some observation effort, but we don't have the observation effort. Basically, I don't think it's a thing like this, because our records don't really mostly come from beachgoers. Sometimes in the summer, but not mostly. There are various categories like fishermen, sometimes scuba diver, sometimes just individuals stranded on the beach. So it's just not one category, so I don't think so. Thank you. Up there.
Hi there. Who identifies the species?
Okay.
And how do you validate that the species is correct?
Our team. Of course, sometimes we go through platform in which the species is validated, for example, iNaturalist, because we have all the, and actually it is a long talk. If you want, we can go deeper. For some kind of data, the data are validated because of the system. From other kind of data, we are in a team, and so we look together for species. We discuss. We are in a team of scientists, so the validation comes from us most of the time.
And do you make note of who actually identifies?
Sorry?
Do you make note of who identifies the species? For example, on iNaturalist, you've got people have profiles. And
yes, in our database we have. It's not showed in the global database that we put on online, but in our database there is a field on regarding the identifier, so we can go to the identifier and ask if you have some doubt. There is a question from Francesco. Okay.
And when they come, for example, for high naturalists give a likely ID, and then we try to filter for those with the highest likelihood. But then we always watched for these identification. So the real strength here is that there is a shark expertise. There is a team with the shark expertise that are validating all these records. And if you find any error, if you find any bug, please tell us, and then we can annotate that you contributed to this. So this is a system that we are developing, but and will take into account also the contribution of the validator. So the idea is to be as collaborative as possible and have more shark expertise as possible for having a robust data set of this kind.
Okay, thank you very much. To move on.
Thank you.
Ioannis Iovos, next talk. Okay, Ioannis present preliminary evidences of illegal elasmobranch fishing in Libya, please.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for being there. So I start with this very nice image, but some very hard images will follow. So for those working on marine conservation and marine biology, we all know that Libya has a big gap of knowledge regarding its marine biodiversity. It's a very interesting area with a very extending coastline. So we started thinking that it will be really interesting to do some work there. We started not with sharks, we started with alien and invasive species and marine biodiversity. But then soon, while we started reviewing all the existing bibliography, we noticed that it's very interesting also for elasmobranchs. So it's one of the countries with the greatest increase in elasmobranch landings. I have this number, which is about 7,000 tons, but they started reporting in 2009, and for 2015, I was checking yesterday, and is about 4,000, and still, if we ignore Spain and France, that most of the catches are coming from the Atlantic, Libya is the main country based on what is reported in the Mediterranean. And in the latest work of Dalvi was identified as the top priority country for conservation. So what we did, actually, as Filippo said, social media have a high potential for gathering data, and it seems like they are very active in Libya. They have at least 5 fishing groups that we know, with more than about 70,000 accounts that are active. They post from 5 to 10 posts daily, so you can gather lots of information, not only for elasmobranchs, but in general for many marine species. And what we actually did, this is like a rapid assessment, so we wanted to collect very fast data to understand if this makes sense and if we have to go deeper and see more things and work more intensively on the elasmobranch landing, trade, and in general about elasmobranchs. So we did this between January and May 2019. We followed the MECO protocol, and we collected pictures, and then we identified the species that we saw. We collected data on the location, the date of the event, the fishing technique. We focused mostly on fished individuals, not so much on actual observations of alive specimens, and other information about the depth that the individuals were caught. So what I'm gonna present now is the first rapid assessment we did, that we collected 59 observations of elasmobranchs through social media. Currently we have more than 130, and I will explain you also how we plan to develop this work that we are doing there. In these 59 records, we had 16 different species, 78% of those are listed as critically endangered or endangered. And the most common species we found were Carcharinus plumbeus, Glausteus semiculus, Rhinobatus rhinobatus, and Squatina squatina. So here you see all the species. Initially, we had many Carcharinus, plumbeus. We suspect that they are plumbeus. Of course, through the pictures, it's not always easy to identify them, but we are, let's say, kind of confident about the identification. And now that I told you I have more data, the guitarfish are raising, and also angel sharks. I think after Kat Gordon will present also some data about Libya. It's a very interesting place about angel sharks. And we have also many more records of Isurus oxynechus, and I agree with what Filippo presented, that we get many small ones also in Libya. You can see all the species, and then 71% of those is protected based on the recommendation of GFCM, but there is no national transposition, so yeah, this is the common story that we have everywhere in the Mediterranean. And analyzing also how they were fished, 66% is coming from recreational fishing, and the rest is 29% is professional fishing activities, and these 5% are lost animals. So what is interesting though, when I started looking on this data and the 66% of recreational fishing, I was amazed because in Libya there is no clear law saying that recreational fishers cannot sell. So actually, although they are fishing with recreational techniques, at least what we call recreational techniques in the EU Mediterranean countries, in Libya can be used also for commercial purposes. So actually, most of the records of the recreational fishing records, we found them in the fish markets. So they were selling them. And then in regards to professional fishers, the majority was coming from small-scale fishing boats, not industrial fishing. So I separated in three. This is very common in the bibliography, so normally they separate Libya in three different areas. So most of our records were coming from the Gulf of Sirte, which I mean, this obviously has biases. I will talk later about the biases, but is also a very fished area, and an area we suspect that has a high biodiversity in general, and also is very interesting for angel sharks, this area, and we have many records of angel sharks, so there is an influence, of course, in these percentages. And then going back to the fishing fleet, as I said, most of the records of professional fishing were coming from small-scale fisheries. So small-scale fisheries, they have all these types of artisanal fishing, they have all these types of boats. And then you can see in table 1, as it is presented now, the percentage of the fishing boats, of small-scale fishing boats in these three areas that I described. This is why we decided to separate them in three locations. And most of them are coming from most of the fishing fleet, of the small-scale fishing fleet, is from the western area. So here I'm gonna show you some very hard images, which I must say that is the reality, and most of them are like this. You can see some extremely threatened and some protected species. And they are in the fish markets, or mostly in the fish markets, all of them. So it's an angel shark, Alopia superciliosus, and Mombula mombula. This is coming from the fish market of Susa city. And then here, those are images from the Gulf of Sirte. I was amazed when I started receiving these images. And then we have more. This is from the west side. Anyway, as I said, there are limitations. We have a low number of observations and biases in detected species, because people tend to report catches that are more unique. So we don't find catches of raja, but still is interesting, and there are also other limitations, like the locations and the percentages I presented also has to do with the number of users of social media in those areas. Of course, there is a political instability in the area, that in some areas they have more access to social media, in others no, but it was a rapid assessment. So, and what we want to do next, because this was the initial idea was to do this first try to understand if it's worthy to look deeper in that, and definitely is worthy. So we plan to work with fishermen in the area and also visit the auction markets and try to record some species-specific data if possible. We already do the same work in Greece, so we will replicate our protocol there. And we will focus most on the west side because the fishing fleet is larger, and the Gulf of Sirte we will focus mostly because of the interest for the angel sharks. As I told you, Kat will present you more later on. I would like to thank my colleagues from Libya. They wanted to be here, at least Sarah tried, but it was impossible for her to get the visa. She's doing most of the work. I'm mostly helping with the data analysis, and I will be happy to hear questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ioannis. Any questions?
Hi, Yanis.
Hello.
I would like to ask if there is any data available from previous years from Libya, apart from the citizen science program.
There are data, but the Lasmo data, at least the FAO, are aggregated in 4 categories, so makes impossible any deeper analysis. I mean, there are some papers as well, but as far as I know, and I was checking this yesterday with Alex, there is no checklist for the species fauna. There are no species-specific data, so I mean, we have to work more on Libya, I guess, in the future. Not only us, I mean, everybody that is working in the area.
So they don't have to record the catches of elasmobranchs in the area?
Elasmobranchs in 4 aggregated categories. And I guess from, I mean, what is reported and what we have seen obviously has nothing to do one with each other. So I guess even those aggregated categories, I cannot be sure at what extent, at least they present the tones, the real tones. So, and also there is a problem with the recreational fishers that they can sell and they don't have to report. So I don't know exactly how this might work in the future.
Any more questions?
Good morning, Yanis. Thank you very much for the talk. Just pointed out that you don't know how it's going to work with the recreational fisheries, but I know it's like a big issue also like in Spain because there's a high impact on the species, and we also are struggling to see how we can collect those data. Maybe you have an idea how you're going to tackle that issue?
We have worked in the past in a paper that is published. We utilized again social media, mostly YouTube videos. We did this study in EU Mediterranean level, so it was Josep Lloret from Spain that was involved. But through these studies, we mostly focused on the abundance of not the abundance, the diversity of species and the target species that recreational fishers are targeting or they are catching. But again, there are biases. Then, of course, you can do questionnaires. This is something that we would like to do also in Libya, but is even harder and is easier at this point and how the situation in Libya is to work with professional fishers. But it's definitely something that is worthy to get into it. I guess questionnaires is the best choice for recreational fisheries now, at the moment.
And do recreational fishers in Libya need a license to do it
No.
for a specific species?
No. No, there is no license, and the law is not completed since ever. That's why they can sell as well. I mean, it's not that they are allowed to sell, but there is nothing telling them not to sell. And also, I suspect that we get many species that are sold from recreational fishers, but also there are others that they keep for their consumption. So subsistence fishing, I expect in Libya to be high. And this is something, I mean, because they sell them, they keep all the low value for themselves. So I don't expect to find pictures on Facebook of low value species, because there might be some daciatis or rajas. Normally they don't report those.
Okay. Thank you, Ioannis.
So next talk will be by Laura Garcia. Toxic soup, fins from top traded shark species in Hong Kong and China, found not recommended for human consumption. Please, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I first want to start with a big thank you. Thanks for being here in the early morning session. I really appreciate it. Also, a big thank you to Emilio for being super helpful before getting to the conference, like the previous weeks. It's crazy how efficient he was with all of us, so a big thank you for that. I'm very excited to present to you a very small part of the big project we have in Hong Kong with the Predator Ecology and Conservation Lab at Florida International University in Miami, where I study. So again, this is just really a very small part of it. So if you have questions, you can find me in the coffee break later. Sorry, I don't think this clicker works the way I want it to work. So sharks are caught worldwide for a variety of their body parts. However, we do know that the most lucrative shark-related fishing business is the shark fin trade. So sharks are usually and ideally caught and landed as a whole, and then the fins are detached and left to dry in the sun. Once they're dried, they are packaged and shipped to fin trade hubs. Once they make it to the main fin trade hubs, they are chemically processed. We don't necessarily know what the process entails. It's very secretive, and they don't really want to tell us. However, we do know that then those fins are either re-exported to other locations or locally sold in Asia at retail markets. The fins you find at retail markets are already prepared to be used in shark fin soup. You don't have to do anything, any extra steps. You can use them for your soup. So shark fin soup has been considered an Asian delicacy for centuries. It conveys wealth and status in Asia, and it is also wrongfully believed to increase lifespan and improve virility. So there's definitely a lot of pros for them to consume it, apparently. So past the 4 efforts in demand reduction have focused on, especially in Asia, that's where I study, they have focused on getting famous citizens, Asian citizens, because that's the only way you're really gonna get to those consumers, actively rejecting shark fin soup in TV advertisements or important events in the continent, and also with politicians banning the use of shark fin soup at political banquets. However, NGOs have also been trying the approach of trying to explain to people the intrinsic value of sharks and their important role as like their ecological role as predators. However, while this has been generations, the older consumer generations that actually have the purchasing power that drives the demand for shark fin soup are not really interested in this approach. So we think, and NGOs in Hong Kong seem to think so too, that a health-based approach would actually be more useful for these older consumer generations and help further reduce the demand for this product in Asia. So with that in mind, we asked ourselves if shark fin is a safe product to consume, right? So we analyzed 5 relatively inexpensive metals that all have been previously reported to have adverse health effects, whether consumed in large quantities or in very small doses, but for prolonged periods of time. So we chose mercury, arsenic, cadmium, lead, and selenium, and they have all been known, as I said, to have adverse health effects, including carcinogenic effects, fetal development issues, and also damage to the central nervous system. So what we did, so our lab has been working in Hong Kong for almost a decade now, and previous students, not me, went to Hong Kong, are like the main shark fin trade hub in the world, and also Guangzhou, which is one of the biggest retail markets in Asia, and with local collaborators, went undercover, bought fins, but we actually do not buy the fins. We buy what you guys can see here. These are called fin offcuts, and they are super cheap. It's like $13 for one of these bags, which can have up to 500 offcuts. So these offcuts come from actually cutting the bigger fins and making them look pretty on display so that they have a higher value for restaurants. So with these offcuts, we actually have over 15,000 offcuts that have been already genetically identified to species by previous students, Diego Cardeñosa and Dr. Andrew Fields, who are working on tracking the species composition of the trade by doing genetic analysis and like mini barcoding, but I'm focusing on the demand reduction. So because I'm a graduate student and I cannot analyze 15,000 species for 15,000 fins for heavy metals, I chose the 9 species that are most prevalent in the trade: the blue shark, the silky, the black tips, all of the hammerheads, so our smooth, scalloped, and grayed, our short-fin mako shark, bull shark, and oceanic white tip. So with these 9 species, I got 267 processed offcuts. The reason we only got 267 was because I only was able to use 2014 offcuts because some of these species are actually CITES listed species, and I need a lot of permits to ship them to the US from Hong Kong, so I could only do pre-CITES samples. However, and you might think, why are you doing CITES species? They're already listed on CITES. Well, CITES is the bricks, but it doesn't actually build the house for conservation. So we do know that CITES species are still incredibly prevalent in the Hong Kong trade, and we do need other approaches or help. We need to help the implementation of CITES and help still further reduce the demand. So it is still relevant whether they're already listed. So for some of our metals, selenium, cadmium, and lead, we didn't find any metal levels that were like of health concern. However, mercury tells us a very different story. So the green line you guys see here is the maximum level, mercury level, allowed to be present in shark fins in Hong Kong. This level is established by the Hong Kong Center for Food Safety. It's the legal advisory, and if you are selling fins above that level, you can go to prison and you will have to pay a $50,000 Hong Kong fine. What we found was actually that all of our fins, as you can see here, were above that level. So while the Hong Kong government says that they usually are selling fins that are below mercury levels, and the very few times that they've analyzed this metal, it's been an isolated affected batch that they have like retired from the market. We do know now that this is like a consistent issue, and mercury levels are always over the limit they actually established. If we were to take a more lax restriction, like the European Commission restriction, which is 1 ppm instead of 0.5, the story would be slightly better. So let's say you go tonight here in Italy and go to a Chinese restaurant and buy a bowl of shark fin soup, right? If you were to eat one of these three species you see in gray, you'd be below safe consumption levels, so you're good. However, we do know that the blue shark right here makes up for 50% of the traded volume of fins in Hong Kong, and it's the one that it's actually mostly re-exported to Europe. So if you were to order tonight a bowl of shark fin soup in Italy, you'd be more likely to get blue shark than any other shark here. So this story is probably not great for you either. We do know, however, that not all of the total mercury is toxic or of a health concern. So we analyzed the methyl mercury on the This is the total amount of mercury on average we found in every shark species, and in red you have the percentage that is actually methyl mercury. While they seem a little different, they are not significantly different. So across the board, for shark fins, processed shark fins that is, of the total mercury you can analyze, you can say that around a 70% is methyl mercury. This is pretty cool because there's a study in 2014 by Naluri et al. That did unprocessed fin samples, and they found the exact same amount. So it was like a 67 plus minus 22%. So we can hypothesize that every time you go and do your mercury analysis, which is way cheaper than doing methyl mercury, you can assume that 70% will be methyl mercury and just use that for your calculations. When we look at arsenic, it's kind of the same story. It's not all of arsenic that's toxic, it's just inorganic arsenic, and that's actually very low in sharks. The EPA says that 9.5% of the total arsenic is actually inorganic arsenic. We actually believe that it's way lower in sharks. We're working on it, so you can ask me about it later. But for now, we're using that 9.5%, and also to calculate levels of arsenic is a little different than mercury. You have to take into account the amount of fin that goes into each bowl. So the minimum amount you can find in a shark fin soup recipe, if you're trying to prepare one, is around 50 grams of fin per bowl. And if you were to use the maximum amount, that's 150 grams of fin per one bowl, which is basically using a huge shark fin in one bowl, which is done in 3 different regions of China. So when we calculated our results for the minimum amount of fin, there was no concerns for arsenic. However, if you were to be on one of those 3 regions in China that uses the whole fin in one bowl, the blue shark actually is above safe consumption levels for inorganic arsenic. So that also doesn't tell us a good story there. So with this information, I want to remark that the blue shark, which makes, again, over the 50% of the traded volume of fins in the world, it's like a crazy amount. These guys are extremely overfished, at least in some of the populations, is not good in terms of mercury, in terms of methyl mercury, and in large amounts in terms of arsenic too. So it should definitely not be consumed. So we're pushing for that. I'll talk about it a little more. But also, we know that for all of the other shark species, which the 9 species I talked about kind of make up for 65 to 70% of the traded volume of fin, so it's like a large amount of the global shark fin trade, should not be consumed, especially by pregnant women and children. But also, our mercury levels are consistently doubling and tripling the maximum levels advised for health safety concerns. So these advisories should be extended to the rest of the population, especially for places where shark fin soup is consumed heavily, like Taiwan, China, Indonesia, Vietnam. So what next? Now we know that shark fin soup's bad, right? So we have to do something with this information. So we're actually extremely lucky. We have the funding to go next year to Hong Kong, issue a press release. We'll have local media, newspapers. We have the funding to do TV advertisements, to go to radio stations, and just get it out there, get the message to not consume shark fin soup, not because sharks are important or, because you like them, just because it is bad for you, which is our approach, right? So also because this data is official and it's EPA standardized, the Hong Kong government is actually subjected to advisory releases. So their own law forces them to make an official release and an official statement saying that we found these results and that they are selling these fins. This is not gonna put any retailers in jail. The retailers did not know that they were selling these fins, so that's okay. However, now they are gonna have to be more consistent on this mercury analysis on the fins they're selling. And also, we're working with the Hong Kong Bloom organization to push for proper species-specific labeling. So right now, when you buy shark fin soup, you're just buying shark. You don't know what you're buying. It could be any species. So we're trying to push for better labeling of the product so that you know what species you're consuming, and you can also do a more informed choice. So if you want to buy great hammerhead, that's great, probably not a great idea, has a lot of mercury, but it's your choice. And if you want to use a smaller shark, you should you have the right to choose it. So that's what we're working with, and this is gonna start in January, so you can follow us on Twitter and try to see what we're up to. But before I leave, I wanna thank my university for sending me to Europe, which is actually where I'm from, and funding this talk and meeting here, and then the Hong Kong Bloom Association for helping us on site collect these fins, and also the International Women Fishing Association for funding my research and my living expenses in the US, which is a lot. So thank you so much. I'll take questions, I guess.
Thank you, Laura. I don't think we have time for questions. Sorry for that. But maybe during the coffee break, you can go and ask whatever you want to Laura. Okay, thank you.
Next speaker, Lars Jacobsen. roadmap for interesting and effective shark research communication on social media. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lars Jacobsen. I come from Norway. I study media at the University of Tromsø. So today I want to talk about research communication on social media and try and help you to make it more effective and interesting. Before I start, I would like to thank the organizers for accepting my presentation, and also Save Our Seas Foundation and EEA board for granting me the travel bursary. So I want to go over 3 things today. I want to talk about some basics of social media communications. I want to tell about some guidelines that I have created, and a basking shark outreach project that the Institute of Marine Research did, where they used my guidelines. So, basics of social media communication. We have 4 types of social media. We have the social community, publishing sites, commerce, and entertainment. The focus for research communications should be around the community. So social community is Twitter or Facebook, the most used ones. And they are built around relationships building between people. So when the whole platform is based around people that want to have a relationship with other users. So you have friends, family that you want to follow or be friends with. This is a highly interactive platform also. You can chat with people and share. You can post yourself, like. This makes it so that potential reach for your research will be very large if you make it correctly. So this is most effectively used in a combination with a website. So I have illustrated it here. You have your social media site, and the big dots is the followers of your social media site, and the small ones are their friends. And then you want to use the social media platform to be interactive with the users and make posts that are interesting and grabs the attentions of people and make them maybe want to share your posts. And that will then maybe make them go over to your actual content on your website. The website content can be a YouTube channel where you post educational videos, maybe your institute's website, or research blog. So when you make your social media account, you should think about that you have something to communicate. What do you want to tell about to people? Who are you going to tell this to? By knowing these 2 things, you can then choose what fits you best by how you create the posts on social media and what platform you should use. Try and have quality over quantity. The things that you put on social media, try and have make it so that its potential for sharing is big, but this makes it so your potential reach gets larger. Another little tip is to use post planners or scheduling apps. This can save you a lot of time. It's time consuming to do communication work. If you use scheduling apps, you can pre-plan your posts, and also you can make it so that it goes out automatically when you post on your content website. And it's okay to share other people's posts as long as it's in line with your target audience and what you want to communicate. So for the posts themselves that you put out in your social media, use visual media. This is the attention grabber on your posts. So that would be pictures, videos, infographics, something like that. The text on the posts, it's smart to use questioning posts instead of just a statement. If you ask the reader directly, they are 2.5 times more likely to actually go to your content than if you just put a statement. So that would be asking them, have you seen, have you been here, how would you do this, or something like that. Keep the text short. the attention span of some people on social media is not that great, and also you can use the same text for different social medias. So Twitter restricts your length to 240 characters. So if you keep the text below that, then you can use the same posts on both Twitter and Facebook and whatever platform suits your audience. Use hashtags. This will help you get more, reach out more. So this should be hashtags that are relevant to your research and your target audience. Hashtag shark research, or whatever suits you. And try and choose one thing to share only from your content. This helps you with being precise and shortening the post. So if your content is about satellite tagging a shark, you might have some cool shark that you want to tell people about, and the cool new satellite tag. Choose one of those two things, and then you can tell more about it in the actual content on the website. And you should try to avoid using abbreviations in your posts. This excludes people that do not know the abbreviation, and your potential reach to your audience gets lowered. If you have a lot of repetitive posts, over time you will lose followers, and this also restricts your potential reach to whoever is your targeted audience. Avoid typos. You see more of a professional if you write correctly. Keep the posts precise and catchy. Remember, it's about making them stop and watch your actual posts, and then becoming interested, and then they go over to your actual quality content on your publishing site. And don't use too of a technical language. This also excludes some people that might not know what you're talking about. The technical language you can explain in your content. So the Basking Shark Outreach Project that the Institute of Marine Research did was a project where they wanted to tell the public about basking sharks in Norwegian waters, and they wanted to reach as many people as possible with this in Norway. And the hopeful effect of this would be that the audience would report back on observations and engage us. So what we did, we created a press release with information about the researchers, about basking sharks, why we wanted their observations, and some more stuff like that. It's kind of like a news article. And then we used social media then to try and get people over to that press release. And from that press release, they could then find more information on the website about basking sharks or the institute. And they could also find a report form for observations, and they can contact us directly by email and phone. What we also did, we sent this press release out to newspapers, local newspapers around the coast of Norway, especially fisheries newspapers that would be relevant for our targeted audience. And then hopefully some of them would then write about this in a more traditional way then, where you do mass communication and blast the public about whatever content you want to give. And in our case, the press release was about basking sharks. And then hopefully some of them would go back to the press release and find the observation report form. So here are the social media posts themselves. The text says, seen a giga shark like that lately? Then we want to know. Read more and report with a link. The visual media we used is this cool video of a basking shark in a Norwegian fjord. It's a drone footage. That's the attention grabber, and then the text is trying to get them interested in it. This is the Twitter one we used. It's a little bit more basic. It's have you seen a basking shark? With the picture. It's a little bit more basic because the institute focus is on Facebook. So this is an auto-generated one. The results is that we got in over 40 observations over a 6-month period. That is from April to October. And past projects had 37 observations over a 5-year period. So we greatly increased the observations that the public report. So how would your social media post look like? Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Any questions? We have time for questions. Okay, thank you.
So next speaker is Crisula Gubili, high levels of mislabeling in elasmobranch meat products, investigating species utilization with DNA barcoding in the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So before we actually started working on the project, we're going to find in our results, especially because we keep on finding some really interesting stuff being landed and sold in Greek markets. So after we got our results, we had very long conversations with Andrew Griffith, who unfortunately is not here, and we decided to go a little bit wider on a bigger scale. And this is why I'm just presenting preliminary results of this wider project. But since we are in Italy, I think a history lesson is required. And that's why I will take you to the Archaeological Museum of Thessaloniki, where you could see some amphoras from the Roman time that were used to transport products, wine, oil, other products in general. But most important is that they had stamps. And those stamps would point out what the product is and also where it came from. So product identification and traceability was of high importance even from ancient time. So if someone comes and says traceability is a modern thing, just tell them to go check their facts. But what is happening with Chondrichthian meat? Now, what we usually have is your fish landed, and then it's processed by removing its skin, and then you cut it and you have your skate wings or your steaks or fillets. And at least in Europe, we are a little bit lucky because we have regulation where, in theory, the label, on the label, you should have the product, commercial and scientific name, the geographical area, the production method, the fishing gear, but this, come on, okay. The story is a little bit different when you go to the market. What you will see is probably just a name, maybe the fishing area, the common name, and then in some cases you have the scientific name. In some cases you have nothing. In others you have just a lemon in a mouth. But what we don't have, at least, is shark fins, and we are lucky with that because we already have a lot of trouble with the previous one, and our plate is full. So I'm moving on the case study between Greece and the comparison between Greece and Italy, and I'm focusing only on Mustelus species product. So for that, to identify all the steaks, and we used partial sequencing of 2 mitochondrial genes, 16S or CO1, or actually both. And why Greece and Italy? And why the Mustelus species? Both countries have specific regulation, and these products are sold under specific labels. Galeos or Galeos drositis. In Italy, you will find them as Palombo. Now, we went, unfortunately, in Italy, I took the samples from a study back in 2010. I'm still waiting for the Italian samples to arrive. So this is a sort of a limitation here. But in Greece, we got 115 samples. We were going to fish markets and fishmongers or open markets. We would take our sample, then we'll go straight to the lab, do our DNA extraction, amplify, purify, send for sequencing, get our data, blast it, and then we got our results. Now, in Italy, based on that data, there were 7 to 8 species identified. Mislabeling was high, almost 80%, pretty much close with the prohibited species, and that was mainly driven by the Squalus acanthias, since the Mustelus species were only represented by 22%. In Greece, we had obviously a wider palette. We have 6 gills, 7 gills, squatina. We do go for a Mustelus species. Therefore, our mislabeling was a little bit lower, and also the prohibited species. When it comes to vulnerable and endangered critical species, Italy was again higher on percentages. We had a little bit more color on our histogram, mainly because of the presence of 6 gills and 7 gills, which is a little bit ironic because these species are protected by Greek legislation. However, we seem to have a tendency of consuming them even though we do not have a lot of data about them. Now, in Greece, we did a little bit of more extensive sampling, and we tried to find species comparison among cities and retailer types. So we went to the two largest cities, Athens and Thessaloniki, and this one's here, in case you don't know Greece. So we have Athens and Thessaloniki, and then we have Kavala, which is a smaller city in Komotini, my hometown, that I finally managed to put on the map. Now, the results show that pretty much bigger cities have higher diversity on species, and so there was no surprise that they will also have the highest occurrence rates of prohibited species. For mislabeling, the results were a little bit mixed. Athens had the highest mislabeling rate, but it was followed by smaller cities. When it came to different retailer types, in Thessaloniki, we found that open markets had more prohibited species than fishmongers. But what was a giveaway was the price. If you were actually going to buy a true Mustelos product, the price was higher. So you would find something around 14 euros on average. If it was a substitute species, then the price was lower. It was about 11 euros. Now, if I compare it with a still currently EU member in the UK, things are a little bit different. UK does not follow EU legislation, sort of, and the label is a bit wider. Andrew would tell me that they have about 10 to 12 different names for buying shark meat, so they have like an umbrella term. So as there was no surprise there was no mislabeling. But they have 66% of locally threatened species and also high import. And then Greece, we have 55% mislabeling, 60% of locally threatened species, and out of which 11 came from species with prohibition. Now, the next question, and I think Jaime just touched the issue, was about the skate wings. And since this is a preliminary study, we've only analyzed 11 species up to now, out of which 10 were from thornback rays and 1 from sandy rays. It is weird, please correct me if I'm wrong, at least in Europe, there is an umbrella designation and label for batoids. In Greece, we use names as vatos, trigona, salachi, rina, or ragia clavata, and probably there are more in other places, in other corners of Greece. So since there is no regulation, there is no mislabeling, but there is one prohibition. I mean, the sandy ray is prohibited, so we reached our 9%. Pretty much our results are highlighted also in the recent WWF regional report, where it says that sharks and ray fisheries suffer from exceptional undermanagement, that improved fishery management regimes are needed across the board to save the declining populations. And the key answer, I think, is that both consumers and markets must have a role to play. The lack of transparency, traceability, and proper labeling leaves the field open to seafood fraud. And this uncertainty cannot only be felt only in the Mediterranean, but also across the world. So as I said, we went a little bit wider, and we want to go for a European study. And we have so many questions. We want to see what's the difference between the north and the south of Europe. What about in some countries like Spain and France, where they have multiple coastlines? There are countries that have cultural, culinary, legislative difference. There are retailer type differences. So we have a very nice group of people collaborating with us, academics, NGOs, people that want to help. So please, if you want to join our project, feel free to contact me or Andrew on the emails provided. Thank you for listening. And there are so many people that I would like to thank, but I didn't think I don't have enough time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any question? I do have a question.
Yes.
Where do the samples from Italy come from?
Actually, they all came from Milan.
From
So,
Milan,
yes.
okay, okay.
They also done some morphometrics on other samples, but I didn't use that. I just
Yeah.
stayed with the barcode method. I didn't want to compare.
From Milan, a local
I don't
mark.
know. I
Ah,
need
okay.
to go back to the paper
Okay.
and have a look.
Just curious.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Any other question? One there?
Hi, nice talk. Would it be interesting for your project if we just go to our markets in our towns and we can take pictures of the rays or sharks that are there? Because I usually go to the fish market where I come from in Spain, and they usually sell rays and different kind of sharks, usually silurinos and gallios. But in the rays, I think it will be interesting because I usually find like Raya SPP.
Yes.
So maybe it will be interesting if we could just send you those
It is
pictures.
also a good option, but in some cases, it is, at least I've seen in Greek fish markets, the skates skinned. So we don't know what they are from.
I've seen both skinned and with
yes,
and the
exactly.
full complete animals. So maybe if you want, we can send you pictures of that.
Sure.
If it's useful for your project or...
Any help is highly appreciated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Time for another question? Okay, if not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker, Taya Mirinda Dinkel, involving stakeholders in the evaluation of Atlantic sharks, fisheries management, and why matter to sharks.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here this morning. My name is Taimirinda Dinkel, and I'm going to that I did for my master thesis, working together with stakeholders and see what we could find out about management strategies together with them. So this work was done together with the University of Alicante and the Spanish Fisheries Confederation. I thought I'd start the presentation with some pictures, just in case nobody of you has ever been in a port where they bring sharks. So this is from the port of Vigo, which is the biggest one in Spain and one of the biggest in Europe where shark landings happen. So we can see that we have some blue sharks here, short fin mako here, and they are either sold freshly or frozen. The biggest batch is actually frozen. So the products of the shark catches in Spain, the fins go mainly to the Asiatic market, but also to California, while carcasses go to mainly South America, but also in Europe trade. So the main target species for the Spanish long-line fleet that works in the Atlantic Ocean, which is the one I work with, is actually Schiphis gladius, which is a swordfish. But they do retain a high amount of bycatch of blue sharks and shortfin mako. But the question is, do we really have to continue calling it bycatch, or do we need to find a new term? When I asked the fishermen if they could estimate the rough proportion of their annual retainments on the boat, it was interesting to see that actually 63% as medium is blue shark, and only 25% is Schiphis gladius, so swordfish, being shortfin mako the third species. So it is very important to the fishermen in Spain, and in some cases, over 70% of their total catches in a whole year are sharks and not swordfish. So if we have a look at this, these are the total catches. These are statistics from ICAT, and we can see the blue line indicates the total catches in the Atlantic Ocean, while the red one indicates the proportion of Spain. For the whole time series that we have represented here, Spain has catched always the highest amount of blue shark, but also shortfin mako in the Atlantic Ocean, only followed by the second country, Portugal. So if you look at this representation comparing to the total, we see that European countries have a huge impact on what shark fisheries are in the Atlantic. So when we have a look at the last evaluations that they have carried out, we can see that especially for the shortfin mako, in 2017, there was a 90% of a probability of it being overfished and suffering from overfishing, which was kind of confirmed in the 2019 new assessment.
For blue shark, the situation seems a little bit better, but they also point out that we have a little bit of uncertainty, and therefore we have to take this into account when making management strategies, because it may not be as good as we maybe think it is. So based on these evaluations, it is obviously been talked about that there may be additional management strategies for both of these species, which was a focus of the work we carried out. So I quickly defined what the stakeholders, because I wasn't sure if everybody knew what it was, but it's basically any person that has an interest in an issue. So when we are talking about long-line fisheries targeting sharks in the Atlantic, we're actually talking about fishers, NGOs, scientists, but also others like consumers, fisheries managers, depending industries, and buyers and resellers. So the aim of this study was to involve stakeholders in evaluating management strategies, and you can do that in different degrees. So this graph shows us different ways how you can actually include them, and ours would be maybe in the consultation between collaboration stage, which means we got information from them and with them, and we work together, but we are maybe using it or maybe not for decision making. I also wanted to point out that involving stakeholders, especially fishermen, is nothing new to the European Union. In fact, already in 1970, they created advisory committees on fisheries, and has been going on and being integrated in the common fisheries policy and also in the ecosystem management approach in 2015. So this study, we thought, let's try it out. Let's see what we can learn together with stakeholders about management strategies. What do we have to lose? Basically nothing. So the objective of this study was study the perception of the stakeholders, see how they perceive if there are any changes, study different management strategies for both shark species, and also inform stakeholders about the results and about scientific facts of fishermen, about reproduction, sizes, and everything. And even today, this is a platform where I'm reaching stakeholders, because everyone in this room is interested in sharks, and therefore we all are stakeholders. So the stakeholders we work with were fishermen, scientists, and NGOs. We work with 3 main ports in Spain, so Burela, Vigo, and Aguarda, and we were able to conduct a total of 21 interviews. It is a small number because it was just a small study, but I have to say that fishermen have a medium age and experience of 30 years, so we do have like a wide span of experience in these people. And then we worked with a lot of NGOs and scientists of all the countries around the Atlantic, sending out 50 surveys. So let's have a closer look at the results of the study. So the first thing we actually wanted to know is, are fishermen aware? Do they see if there is a change happening? And when we asked them, is blue shark changing in the ocean? Are you perceiving something? 65% of them told us, yes, it is changing, decreasing. They're saying the number is decreasing, but also, which may be even more concerning, sizes. They're capturing always smaller sizes. When we asked about the short fin mako, it was interesting because Spanish fishermen indicated that they did not decrease, as the evaluations are suggesting, and 30% of them even told us that the amount of short fin makos that they were encountering increased and that they have to discard a lot in the ocean. When we anyways asked them if they thought if they needed some management strategies, 45% for blue shark said yes, while 65% said yes for short fin mako, even though they had just said they observed increases. When we asked scientists and NGOs if they thought that the current management that are in place are enough, 83% actually told us that they think for both species it is not enough. So when we then asked all the stakeholders if they could actually give numbers, like quantify which of the management strategies for both of these species were the most interesting, it was nice to find out that all stakeholders had similar opinions. So the 3 top choices for all of them were time area closures, minimum size, as well as catch limits. For me, this was like a big surprise because I always heard like fishermen criticizing scientists and NGOs saying fishermen are doing everything. So it was really nice to see that actually all of them have maybe similar ideas. So as we do not have so much time, I'm just going to look into 2 of the management strategies and see which information from the fishermen can help us with these management strategies. So first, minimum size. This is always a question that we have, if this would really reduce fishing mortality. There can be at least 2 scenarios, because with fisheries you never know, you can have so many scenarios. But one could be they just continue capturing the same areas, but now they have a minimum size. So what happens? It may not reduce the fishing mortality, but we have a higher amount of discards. So if fishing mortality is not reduced, this fishery strategy could maybe not be efficient at all. On the other hand, which the fishermen told us that they would maybe be prone to do is displace from places, go to other places, in which case we maybe could reduce the fishing mortality, but are they really going to do it? Because those places are maybe further away, they have to search for new places, and if they don't do this, we come back to the first scenario. What I thought was very interesting and gave me hope was that the fishermen told me that they thought it should be a more restrictive management strategies, and they proposed actually to create a time area closure. So one thing that I also want to mention here is that together with the fishermen, we were able to create 2 distribution maps, I'm calling them, just through their observations. So we have the one for blue shark here and the one for short fin mako, just based on their observation. This is just annotations of what they saw. When we talked about the blue shark, they indicated that the Sol Bank is an area where in summer a lot of juveniles are, and the Spanish fleet is going there. In fact, they told us that mainly the Spanish fleet is going there, which is very interesting for us because this indicates us that we can work on a national level maybe on solving this problem. Exactly, and also involving the fishermen in this idea is maybe gonna be more they're gonna be more compelling to actually accomplish the new management strategy. I quickly also wanted to point out, this is just a quick one of the studies I compared with, and I showed it because it actually has a map. This was from an account in Stevens done in 2008, and we can see that some of the areas that fishermen pointed out as these juvenile areas was already recorded here in summer, as well as pregnant females, which here are indicated by Nakana and Stevens that migrate down. So the take-home message that I just want to throw out in the room today for everybody to be a little bit more open is that fishermen are aware of the changes there are in the oceans, and they are aware of the species they're working with because this is their life. They depend on them. On the other hand, I was very surprised that the stakeholders' opinion were not so opposed. That insight into fishermen's reaction can actually give us an idea of which management strategies can be more effective than others because they give us another angle. Furthermore, their knowledge can maybe be used as a point of reference for targeting some studies like the distribution patterns. We can maybe focus our effort. And for this case, we figured out that maybe we could just find a regional solution, like a national solution, and allowing them to speak up makes them feel a little bit more empowered, and maybe it makes them feel better, and they're more willing to compile with the management strategies. And that's everything for now. I would also like to thank the European Elasma Association Board and the Save Our Seas Foundation for the travel bursary. And all the live animal pictures are from a colleague from Sweden, Magnus Lundberg. I left you the email in case you want to contact him. Thank you very much.
Thank you for interesting speech. Any questions?
Hi, thank you for this very interesting talk. It's exciting and useful work. I wanted to ask, with the recent big studies on tagging and the overlap with the fleets, did you do an analysis to try to overlap the areas that have been identified by the fishermen with those recent papers?
Thank you very much for the question. So this was just the focus of this study was actually working on the management strategy. So this was just something that I compared with some quick literature to see if it was just random distribution the fishermen were doing. So no, in this case I haven't compared it with recent studies, but I think it would be very interesting, to see if it actually overlaps, because then we know that we could even trust fishermen a little bit more and they could really help us in knowing where to study further. Thank you.
We have time for more questions.
Over there, Ellie. Over there in the back. Well. Yeah, please. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you. You make it as widely available as possible, and you encourage, through your industry relations, that they present this work in the relevant fora, because for this year it's now very late in the process, if not too late, but that information would be vital. So very good, excellent, just more application of it would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Another one? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, before the coffee break, I have some announcements. The first one is that we still need the presentations by Pazmigno, Colloca, Young, Bottaro, Fowler, Caro, Gillam, Hood, Ferretti, and Gordon. And since our technicians have their times, please, I suggest to give the presentation during the coffee break, or at least immediately after the lunch, before the session will start. Another announcement is that I'm trying to arranging the shuttle for tomorrow, but we are really busy, so I can arrange a shuttle leaving from the university at 7 in the morning and 10 past 7 in front of the Majorana Hotel. It will be the same bus we will use for going to the Aeolian cruise. Please, I hope you could understand that it's not easy to help all. People that are interested in using this shuttle, contact me as soon as possible so I can arrange all. And the last thing is that for the moment that I will give you the certificates of attendance by email, together with the pictures that we are taking to you during your presentation. I hope you could understand that it is not an easy work, so during next week I will start to send you by email your certificate and your pictures, together with the group picture that we took yesterday, okay? Enjoy your coffee.
Just a moment, Nana, please, just a moment.
Just a moment. So we take this opportunity, just a couple of minutes, to say something, I think, on the behalf of Greece, of course, but also we think on the behalf of everybody of us. And we are talking about the organizer of the meeting, Emilio, and also his amazing staff, so all the supporting faculties, the technician, and last but not least, all the students. And we believe that all of us agree that the organization has been just perfect for this meeting. And so we have been received in a building full of creative sharks, skates and chimeras, from the photo exhibition to the sharky litter boxes and the wonderful children drawing, just to mention some of them. The scenography created an atmosphere that clearly reflects the passion towards sharks and made us deeply diving in the Congress topic. The logistic was so well organized. I don't know what happened. Okay. So well organized that allowed us discovering the real Calabrian face. From the hospitality, we will never forget the wonderful dinner of yesterday, and the perfect weather, and the music, and the dances. So we wish to warmly thank Emilio and the entire team for their deep commitment and this wonderful meeting. Thank you very much. Let's go for the coffee now. Be back in 30 minutes.